Hello everyone and welcome to Art with Nathan. Last week we drew multiple objects in relationship with each other, and this week we're going to look at how to apply tone to create form on your objects. So this is the next step from line structural drawings to actually creating form, making them look like three-dimensional objects. Now this is just merely an illusion. It's a two-dimensional representation of something in the world. Now the best way to think about this is the next step in your visual language, in developing that visual language. Imagine now I've taught you the letters, I've taught you how to put them together in words, and now I'm going to show you how to make sentences. I'm going to show you how to make those sentences mean something. So, and again, this is all technique. I would say it's a trick, but it isn't a trick because it's real. We are portraying something, we are saying something, we are imagining things. So that's what we're going to do. So let's get started. So the first thing I want you to kind of imagine when we're drawing an object. Again, let's start with our basic circle, okay? So I'm going to draw a circle. Again, remember these are construction lines, nice and light. Right, maybe not a perfect circle, but that's fine. Okay, and I'm going to ground my circle somewhere in the world. So this is a ball. Let's just imagine it's just a circle that isn't made out of anything in particular. It's solid, it's opaque, right? It's not transparent. Okay, and it's sitting on a desk or a table or the floor. Okay. Now I've applied my first two steps, line and shape, and I have this abstract form. Okay, and it has a horizon line. So it's not anywhere in particular. Now, how do I start making this thing look three-dimensional? Now, we've done this before very briefly, but we haven't really thought about it. So the first thing we need to make it look round is light. Okay? Now, light travels in a certain direction. So let's just, for example, say the light is coming from this direction. Okay? We've got a strong light coming from this side. And it's hitting the object. So conceptually, we know that over here, in this area, this is where it's going to be the brightest. Okay, you're going to have maybe absolute white light. And then on the other side, over here, it's going to be the darkest. Okay, so there we have a scale already. It looks a bit like a baseball. So we have a scale. We've got the absolute lightest, the absolute darkest on this side, but not necessarily. Now, I'll explain that a bit later. So what I want you to think about when you're doing tones, okay, I'm just going to turn this into a bar, and we addressed this in the first lesson, I know, but for those of you who just joined, this is a quick recap and a slightly more in-depth look. We're going to think about tones in terms of a scale. Right at the bottom, we have the whitest white, a 0, and the darkest a 10. Now, if you go online and you look at different art books, and the scales are weird because they sometimes go from a 0 to a 7 or a 0 to a 9. I don't know why they do that. 1 to 10 makes sense. Okay, you want to take it up to 10, or maybe let's make it 11. You want to take it to 11. That's it. Yeah, 11, because it's more than 10, and that's way better than 10. So 0 to 11. Okay, just ramp it up, guys, because that's what we do. 11 would be the absolute darkest. This is black, okay? So let's say there it's absolutely black. Let's get a bigger pen. This is as dark as it gets, okay? This is midnight with no full moon. All right. Midnight in the wilderness. You don't know where you are. It is black. Cool. And then over here is white. Absolutely. There's just light everywhere, okay? And then somewhere in the middle, is a 5, okay? Which is kind of like your neutral gray, okay? It's nowhere in particular. It's basically like being in a mall. Okay, so that's where we are. And then obviously the other numbers in between. And so that's a good way to think about it. So this is this is a 0, and let's say that's a 11 or 10 or 9 or 7, whatever. So it's a good way to put a scale to it. Now the trick is, how do we portray these different levels, okay? And don't get too stuck on what levels over here, what levels over here. You need to create your own scale in your mind. You need to make these things. There's no point in like asking me what number this is, because my 5 is different from your 5. You know, some people don't go all the way to 11, but I do. And so you might decide to go 7 is your darkest color. That's fine. Okay. So we've got light hitting it, and we know over here is the absolute darkest, it's the lightest. So we're going to just give it some tone. So let's say overall it goes from a 1, 2, 3, and then like a 5 over here, and it goes all the way down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tone it firstly just with a general. So I'm using hatching. So the next lesson we're going to address hatching in a lot more detail. What is hatching? It's just a technique we use parallel lines or cross lines to portray tone. Okay, so I've given it a very general hatch all the way across. You notice I haven't hatched where it's lighter. In fact, my lines, if you look, get a bit wider, further apart, where it gets to the lightest. Okay, so I've given it a very general hatch. Now I know over here is quite dark, okay, but I'm not gonna go full on. I'm not gonna go 11. Okay, you wanna almost stalk your prey in a way. You want to be very gentle about it. So that's one way of putting it. Another way that I always used to tell my students is that drawing is like stroking a bunny. I once had a pet rabbit. Okay, they're not as nice as you think. If you're too rough to begin with, if it's going to run away, it's going to bite you. They're very skittish creatures. But if you are gentle and you approach it, so I'm just adding some cross hatching. So maybe I'm taking it now to a 6, and I'm slowly bringing in, and then over here a 7. Okay, cool. Right. So then we have some sense of three-dimensionality appearing on our ball. So it looks less like a shape. It's got some form. I'm just building it up very slowly, approaching the area of light. I do not want to touch that area of light. I want to keep it light. A really good drawing has a very good fresh values, fresh tones. You don't want it to become what we call muddy, okay? That's like an ugly word in art. Often when someone describes your colors or your tones as muddy, it's usually an insult. So we don't want that. So then we have this idea of form, but we've given it an horizon line, and so we know it'll cast a shadow. Okay, so we're just going to invent a shadow so that it's going to deform that perfect circle. It's going to stretch it out into an oval or ellipse round about there. Now, light is much more complex than what I'm portraying. I mean, it's bouncing around all over the place, and even there's light bouncing off here and hitting there. So you'll have like reflected or refracted light at the bottom over here. So maybe you'll get some reflected light over here too. So that's something you need to just pay attention to. So I'm just going to raise it a little bit. And then I'm just going to color in the shadow. Toning the shadow over here, really quick hatching. So then you have a basic idea of a rounded form, okay, of the tones. But if we want to do something, let's say, let's go a bit more simpler. So we've got a rounded form, but let's say it's a perfectly square form. Okay. Rectangular form. Okay, so I'm going to do a cube. If you've never drawn a cube before, really just have a good look. So with a cube, it's very important that these lines are parallel, but we're not drawing cubes today, okay? We'll get there, guys. Okay, so let's say you've got a more geometric form. A light also plays differently on this. So let's say you've got your light is coming from, again, is coming from here. It's a bit easier now. So we can say that this square will be brighter than this square. Okay, well this plane. So actually, let's say the light is coming from this direction. Okay, so we're going to absolutely white light on this, like a 0 or a 1, and there's some light over here. This is the darkest, and this one's kind of in between because the light's coming directly from there. So it's not quite as dark as this one, but not quite as light as this one. And then you have your shadow. Okay. Right, let's just get a darker pen. That doesn't work. Blue. Okay, guys, please don't be at home drawing on whiteboards. This is just so I can show you what's going on. Okay. Cool. So light will affect planes in a much more general way than rounded surfaces. So it would be easier to tone, but again, unless you have a real object, there might be reflected light over here. There might be some reflections depending on the surface. And textures, also a textured object acts differently towards light than others. Imagine if this was a fairy cube, okay? There would be a whole different effect, but you still approach it in the same way in terms of toning. But it's much more complex to draw textured objects. Okay, so for today, we're going to carry on our theme of doing coffee mugs. Our early morning routine, we're going to simplify. We're going to go back to a very simple object, and we're going to portray it. We're going to go through all the steps, and we're going to do tone. So, but we're not going to use a whiteboard markers, because I know that most of you guys aren't drawing on a whiteboard. I have with me some charcoal. Okay, we'll have a look at that. Making my piece of paper right here. There we go. Okay. Okay. So, charcoal sticks. These are the sort of fundamental drawing implement. Most of the time it's made out of willow, and and you get them in different sizes. You can buy them at most art stores. You get charcoal that is inside of a pencil. So if you don't like to get your hands dirty, or if you prefer working with a pen, you can get that. And they come in, so here's a really skinny one, and here's a thicker one. And it really is a really good thing to draw with. And also, it's really good. You can get little charcoal pills, really good for your blood. You can eat it. Oh. Ugh. Don't try that at home, guys. Now, I often did this when I was a teacher. The charcoal doesn't taste as good as it did that back then. But, oh, that's bad. I had better tasting charcoal, but I was a bachelor, so I was living on 2-minute noodles. So I suppose anything tasted better than this. But yeah, that's going to cleanse my blood a little bit. But please don't be eating too much of your charcoal. But you get pills. Anyway. Ugh. Yeah, so, and how charcoal is made, it's so you can make it in a fire, but it mostly is made, it sticks that has been burnt or baked without the presence of a flame. So it's just put in a very hot oven, allowed to get very hot, and it is turned into char. Oh, haven't done that in a while. So again, this is the first time we're drawing with real drawing implements, not pens. We're going to press very light our construction lines. So looking at our coffee mug over there, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw an axis. Now, I hope you can see this. Look how lightly I'm pressing, guys. Nice and light. And I'm going to decide, here's the top of my coffee mug here, here's the bottom, okay. So now I've got this length, all right. So I'm going to look, my coffee cup is that high. In terms of width, it is not as wide as it is high. So it's not quite that up, it's a little bit smaller. I'm going to say about there. So here's my parameters. Okay, I'm pressing very lightly. What I'd like to do is just with my nail or with a blade, is just strip the edge just along the top of the charcoal. It just makes it a bit easier to draw. There normally is it's like a thin layer on the outside. Okay, so then I have my square. I'm just going to go through the very basics very, very quickly, line and shape, to get my basic structure so we can just jump right into drawing of the tone. Okay. So by now you guys would have been well practiced in the skill of drawing these basic shapes. It should be easy. So you watch me, I'm just jumping through all of those steps. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the basic structure that I have going over here at the moment, but my structural drawing is actually not finished. I'm going to approach the shadows, okay, and how the light plays on the coffee cup as if they were structural elements, just like the handle or anything else in the drawing. I'm going to approach the shadows as structural elements. So the first thing that really stands out is this shadow over here that's cast by the handle. So I'm going to remember my north, east, south, and west. I'm going to look at direction that line goes. I'm just going to draw that in this line, straight down. Okay. So again, treating light as a structural thing. The light is coming from this side of the coffee cup. And again, look over here. Here's another plane of light coming straight down, just a little bit away from the middle over here. And then the shadow, right at the bottom, going that way, all the way across and about there. Okay. And the horizon line, or the edge of the table, is over there. There are a few other things that I need to just take note of, okay, are the highlights. So if you have a look, you get another stick. Maybe that was a dud. Probably it was past its sell-by date. Okay. Another thing you have to take note of is the highlights. Where are the highlights on the coffee mug? So it's very difficult to address highlights from the beginning, but it's good to make note where they are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just erase the highlights out of my charcoal when I'm done. But if you look, there are some reflections over here, but there are 3 little highlights on the rim over here. So I'm just going to take note of their position, okay, for later. Another thing, so when you do your highlights over there, don't outline them kind of like what I just did. You just want to be very light, because you don't want that line around your highlights. Just take note of where they are. Okay, cool. So this is where I'm going to look at my scale and start making decisions. So my absolute 0, okay, white is white, is this highlight here, over there. See it there? Okay, and then my darkest, let's say it's around a 5.5 and a 6, because it's a well-lit room, is over here, okay, and right at the bottom of the mug, okay. You'll see this side of the mug, there's some reflections from the table and light bouncing around, is a little bit lighter than over here. And then we have like a 4 or 3 over here. But we know the entire thing, excluding the highlights, the entire cup is highlighted, is a tone. There's only one or two spots of pure white. And like I said, what we're going to do is we're going to erase the highlights out. So I'm going to get a little piece of charcoal, just crush it up in my hand, and I'm just going to give it an overall tone. Okay, this is a lovely messy thing to do. So let's say I'm toning it at a 3. Now you can use your actual charcoal stick to do this, okay? But you'd have to just wipe it or spread it with your fingers. It's harder to do this with pencil, is to shade with your fingers, okay? Because the grease interacts with the oil in your hands. So if you're going to be shading with a pencil, there's a different way of doing that. But we'll get into that. Don't use your fingers with a pencil. Just try and shade with your hands. You can get a tissue or you can get another piece of paper, roll it up, and shade with that. Okay, so we've got an overall tone. I've lost some of my lines, okay, but luckily I've kind of got a good idea of where I drew them. I can still see them. Charcoal is this amazing medium that it really keeps a trace of everything. You can't quite erase what you've done. It has a really good memory. Another thing that doesn't quite go away with charcoal is the aftertaste. Okay, so you look at the bottom, they're going to draw a really dark line because it's just sitting on that surface to begin with. There we go. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is, again, I'm going to just approach the darkest dark. I'm not going to go full in. I'm not going to ramp it up to 11. Not just yet. I'm going to just approach it. Let's say it's a 7. I'm going to come at it with a 6. Okay. So you'll see the tone is darker along this edge and over here. So I'm going to come at it just at a 6. There we go. And I'm going to treat it like different planes. Okay. So what I do, it's just very fast left and right motion. Okay, so it's kind of like cross-hatching. Just building up the tone, nice and easy. Okay, just along that line. And you'll see it's darker here, and it gets a little lighter in the shadow. So I'm going to really build it along that edge there. But as I get closer to the edge, I'm going to get a bit lighter. And charcoal is not really that hard to get a hold of. Your local art shop, most stationery stores should have charcoal sticks or charcoal pencils. Okay. Again, I'm taking very great care to get that transition. So when I want it dark, I press hard. When I want it light, I press soft. Okay, and I'm just dancing around. You want your pencil or pen to kind of like teeter on everything like a butterfly or a bee. Think about it in terms of that, okay? Very sensitive marks. Now, of course, you can be brutal. There are artists who have very brutal hard lines. There's space for that. So I'm going to look at the handle. You'll see on the sort of the outside edge is quite dark. There's almost another line coming around there. It expands. Okay, I'm going to ignore that dimple for now. And expands and covers. So I'm going to draw that shape in there. And I'm just going to give it a very general tone for now, like a 6 or 7. All right, so it just makes sense. I'm going to soften that edge with my finger. All right, so nice and blend in. Re-establish that, what I've drawn. Cool. Okay. Really just looking very closely at everything back and forth, how things work. Okay. So I'm getting somewhere. So I'm going to do really the dark side. So what I have to just observe, it's dark here and then gets a little bit lighter. That shift from this line, okay, this tone to here is very subtle, but it's there. So I'm going to use the edge of my charcoal. I actually need a smaller piece. I'm going to break it off here. When I normally draw with charcoal, I end up with all these little bits on the floor. Really, it's quite a mess. It really is the best thing to learn how to tone. Looking at the different tonal shifts in the inside of the cup. So you look at the middle, it's darker, comes towards the edge. So those of you who are art students, who are studying maybe at a high school level, you'll find that some of you might still be doing drawing exams, where it's 3 or 4 hour, some of them as long as 6 hours, drawing exams, where you'll be required to draw objects like this. Charcoal is a really good medium. Don't be afraid of it to approach these exams with, because it just gets toned down really quickly and dramatically. When you are drawing something with tone, dramatic light is always a plus. So that's also when you set up your still life, you want good, dramatic, directional light. So it's a bit darker in this little triangle here, so I'm just going to draw it in there. Okay. The shadow on the floor is not as dark as the shadows on the coffee mug. Let's just get that going there. Charcoal's super temperamental as well. But don't be afraid to make a mess, really. Okay. So, I've come to this point in my drawing where what I would call I've blocked in the biggest tones, and I've done some tonal shifts and variations, but it's not quite complete. So this is where you would spend a lot of time really looking at the subtle shifts between tones and really developing those. Where's it darker? Where's it slightly lighter? You'll be going through your entire cup, addressing each area. So for example, I would have a look at this little corner underneath the handle, okay? And I would ask the question, am I getting it right? So I get my eraser, and I would say, for example, well, this tone feels a bit too heavy over here. So I'm going to get my eraser, and I'm just going to lighten it up. Okay, not quite a 1. And a bit lighter here. Feels a bit heavy. I'm going to make it a bit lighter, make it more distinct. It definitely is a shift in the plane of light over there. And I'm going to look at each thing. Now, another thing you can do is you'll find your eraser will be quite rounded edges. Just break your eraser or cut it. Well, I'd recommend this brand of eraser because it doesn't break. Okay. So what I would do is just slice little segments off and little wedges, so you can get those very precise cuts and corners. But obviously I've got the world's most perfect eraser here. Doesn't want to listen to me. But we're going to just pick out those highlights real quick. You'll see that charcoal really does erase quite easily. I mean, look at this highlight here. I can really just recreate that quite easily with the eraser. So this is a cool aspect about drawing. I just think most people don't think about that. There's a negative relationship where you're not adding marks, you're taking away marks. And you can even build away the tone with it. So this is a really good medium to practice tone. They should make car tires out of this rubber. Okay. So again, I'm just going to come over here and just shade around where my perfect highlight is. So just so that is established, that white in the corner there. So what I want is a good shifts in tone. I don't want it to be too muddy or murky. And guys, it's absolutely fine if some of your lines remain. They can see the charcoal lines. They can see your thinking. They can see your marks. That's brilliant. That's what makes a drawing interesting and compelling. If it looks like a photo, why don't you just take a photo, you know? What's the point of that? Okay. So I'm going to make this a slightly bit more rounder. Okay. So at the end of every drawing, we want to look and we want to assess. We want to get some notes. How could I have improved it? How could I have made it better? One thing I would say, I think one thing that's bugging me about this drawing is that it just seems to be there. So just sitting by itself, maybe I want to tone the floor. They're sitting on the wooden desk a little bit. I would say I'm quite happy with it as a demonstration piece. It's not something I would exhibit, but it's a good drawing. I've addressed the structures of within the structure of light that appears on the drawing. I'm happy with the underlying structure. It does portray a coffee cup quite well in the time that I've given it. What I could do is maybe just really make it more dramatic. I could throw that aside and decide I'm just going to ramp it up to 11, and I'm going to make the darks dark and lights light, make it much more dramatic, but that's when more artistic decisions are coming. But for now, this is a really good start. If you went home and you got some charcoal and you were doing drawings of coffee cups like this is brilliant. Just be like, pat yourself on the back and, you know, put some coffee in that, and dip your charcoal stick, enjoy it afterwards, because this is really what you're aiming for. This is an achievement for someone who's never drawn before. I have drawn before. But yeah, so what I want you guys to do is to go home this week, get some charcoal or what I call another soft medium, like a pencil is fine, charcoal's ideal, and go back to those single objects you're drawing. Go look through your books, go find some objects that you found compelling or interesting, and get some dramatic light. Set them up on a table, put a lamp or a torch, shine on the one side, and follow all the processes and the structural lines that I've taught you and tone it up. Okay, and see what you get and really find satisfaction in that. Even if it doesn't work out, it's absolutely fine. Keep those drawings that don't work out, unless you find it a cathartic experience to draw them. Weigh up the benefits there, to destroy them. You know, sometimes it is fine to tear something up and throw it across the room, but really this is a document of your thoughts and your feelings. Maybe you want to keep it. I don't know. But thank you so much for joining us for another episode. Remember to subscribe, like, and share. I'll see you guys next week.